Hi, this is Dina for Splitcoaststampers. In this video, I'm playing with a stamping technique where you layer two different types of ink for a ghosted look. The basic premise of the technique is really simple. You'll start off by stamping with a white pigment or chalk ink or a watermark ink on regular cardstock, and then follow up with a dye ink or spray over the top. It's not a true resist technique, but that first stamped image shows up through the second impression in a really cool ghosty way. I did some experimenting with different base inks and ways to apply the dye ink over the top, so you can see those results here. And I hope that you'll try some other combinations with the inks that you have at home. And this is another one of those situations where there's not really a best combination for every type of card. There may be times when you want a more subtle pattern to show through, and there may be times that you want more contrast. So play around with what you have so you know how different inks react. So I came up with a few different variations of the technique to share. For this card, I'm working on Nina Classic Crest cover stock, and I'm going to stamp the entire panel with a background stamp using white chalk ink. And then I'll be using a solid stamp and several colors of dye ink for my second layer of stamping. And this, by the way, is the base layer from a layering stamp set. So just a side note that you can use those stamps separately. You don't have to use all the layers all the time. When I finished my stamping, I filled in the open white spaces with brushed ink. So that is another way that the ink can be applied for this technique. And it does seem like this type of dye ink settles into the cardstock a little bit after it dries. So the effect is a little more subtle on the finished card here. And again, that's not bad. It's just something to know. For my next card, instead of a full all-over background, I just wanted a pattern in a certain area as a background for one stamped image. So again, I'm stamping with white chalk ink for my first layer of stamping. And instead of stamping for the second layer, I have a dye ink spritzer, and I sprayed that over the stamp pattern. And you can see that pattern showing through almost immediately. I wanted to stamp a silhouette image over my background area, and this is an ink I had tested beforehand, so I know that even though it is a dye ink, the pattern isn't going to show through. And this is the Colorbox Premium dye ink, and it's a little heavier than a typical dye ink, so I knew that it would work well. I had a few spots there that didn't want to stamp, and I used a colored pencil to move the ink and add a little pigment into those areas. For the last sample here, I created a background by stamping this border strip several times. And actually, this stamp underwent a little surgery first so it would fit across my MISTI and also be able to make a continuous pattern. This is one of the 2x7-inch molding mats from ClearSnap. They're great for adding texture to clay and other things, but they're great stamps as well. I used the chalk ink again for my base because I had it out already, but in my testing I noticed that pigment ink worked really well with the foam blender, so that would be another great option here. I had this stencil set out that I wanted to try. ClearSnap has a bunch of new layering stencils, so I thought I would test one out here. And I wasn't sure how the base ink would fare with using a blending tool over the top of it, but it did surprisingly well, even without heat setting, and I wasn't quite sure about that either. So that is good to know as well. I really had fun playing with all these combinations. This is a really simple technique, but there are so many ways that you can run with it, and I hope that you'll share your discoveries as well. Thank you so much for watching.